Eleanor Ashwick scrubbed the flagstones of the Briarwood School for Women with lye soap that had long since eaten the skin from her knuckles, the raw pink beneath stinging each time she plunged her hands back into the bucket, because this was the bargain she had made 3 years ago. Her position, her inheritance, her place in society, all traded for the one thing her half-sister Marguerite could not buy herself: silence about the forged will that had given Marguerite control of the Ashwick estate after their father's death. Eleanor had purchased that silence with her own erasure. She had walked away from everything so that the family name would not be dragged through the courts, so that the servants who depended on the estate would keep their positions, so that the scandal would not reach the newspapers, and Marguerite had let her go without a backward glance. The cost was visible in every line of Eleanor's life. She was 31 years old, employed as a matron at a school that paid her barely enough to keep a single room above a chandler's shop on Hartwell Lane. Her dresses were turned twice. Her hands were rough. She smelled always faintly of lye and tallow and the lavender oil she used to mask both. "Eleanor, you've missed the corners again," said Miss Parnell, the headmistress, not unkindly. "And there are guests arriving for the patronage dinner this evening. I need the hall presentable." "Yes, Miss Parnell," Eleanor said, and pressed the brush harder into the stone, feeling the vibration travel up through her wrists into her shoulders. She did not complain. She had chosen this. That was the part that kept her spine straight on the days when the choosing felt unbearable. The patronage dinner was a quarterly affair, designed to extract donations from wealthy benefactors who liked the idea of educating women more than the reality of it. Eleanor was not invited, of course. She was staff. But Marguerite Ashwick Claremont, who had married well the year after stealing Eleanor's inheritance, was on the guest list. Eleanor discovered this when she carried the place cards into the dining hall and found her half-sister's name written in Miss Parnell's careful copperplate, positioned at the head table beside a name she did not recognize, Lord Renwick. The dinner began at 7. Eleanor was meant to be invisible, standing near the sideboard in case the serving girls needed direction. She had pinned her hair tightly, worn her darkest dress, made herself as small as the furniture. Marguerite arrived in peacock blue silk with her husband on her arm, her laughter filling the room like something poured from too great a height. She was beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful, precise, polished, designed to cut. She spotted Eleanor within 30 seconds. "Good heavens," Marguerite said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear, stopping mid-stride as though she had encountered something unexpected on the sole of her shoe. "Eleanor, I did not realize you had sunk quite this far." She turned to the woman beside her with a smile that contained no warmth whatsoever. "My half-sister. She had some difficulties with money and chose to pursue honest work. We are terribly proud of her in our way." The silence that followed was the particular silence of people pretending not to have heard something while memorizing every word. Eleanor felt it settle on her skin like frost. She kept her hands clasped in front of her. She did not respond. She had learned in 3 years of this diminished life that Marguerite fed on responses the way a fire feeds on air. "Still nothing to say?" Marguerite tilted her head, her earrings catching the candlelight. "I suppose that is what becomes of women who make dramatic gestures they cannot sustain. At least you are useful here. That is more than anyone expected." The women at the nearest table looked away. One examined her gloves with sudden interest. Eleanor stood very still, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on a point just above Marguerite's left shoulder. She breathed. She endured. She did not break. The seat beside Marguerite's place card, the one marked for Lord Renwick, remained empty through the first course. Whispers circulated. The lord was reclusive, rarely seen in society, enormously wealthy, connected to old families across the continent through lines that no one could quite trace. He had funded the school's library wing 2 years prior without ever visiting it. His attendance tonight was considered remarkable. He arrived late. The door to the dining hall opened without announcement, and the draft that entered carried the scent of rain and something older. Stone, Eleanor thought, or the air inside churches that have stood for centuries. She noticed the cold first. Then the sound in the room changed, conversations dropping to half their volume, as though the air had thickened. He was tall in the way that made door frames look insufficient. His features were carved rather than arranged. A jaw that could have been quarried, cheekbones that cast shadows, dark hair swept back from a face that was striking without being handsome. There were faint scars along the line of his left temple, pale against pale skin, and his eyes were the color of winter rivers, gray-green and deep and utterly still. He moved through the room with the unhurried precision of someone who had learned, long ago, that the world would wait for him. Every woman in the room watched him. Several adjusted their posture. Marguerite smoothed her hair and angled herself toward the empty chair beside her, her smile sharpening into something designed to attract. Lord Renwick did not look at Marguerite. He did not look at the headmistress, who had risen to greet him. He did not look at the table arranged in his honor, with its crystal and its silver and its careful hierarchies of status. He looked at Eleanor. She was standing by the sideboard, half in shadow, a water pitcher in her hands. She had not adjusted her posture, she had not smoothed anything. She was simply standing where she had been standing. With the particular stillness of a woman who had made herself small so many times it had become a kind of architecture. He crossed the room. Not toward the head table, not toward the headmistress, toward the sideboard, toward the shadow, toward her. His path took him directly past Marguerite, who reached out a gloved hand to intercept him. He moved past it, the way a river moves past a stone, without acknowledging the obstruction. Past the table of donors, past the clutch of young women who had been positioned strategically near the wine, past the headmistress whose greeting died on her lips. The room went silent, one table at a time, like candles being extinguished in sequence. Eleanor watched him approach with the expression of someone who has been told a wild animal is tame and does not quite believe it. Her hands tightened on the pitcher. He stopped 3 feet from her, which was close enough for her to see that his eyes were not merely gray-green, but contained, in their depths, something that slipped past language. Something that looked, if she had been foolish enough to trust her own perception, like recognition. "You are Eleanor Ashwick," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, with a roughness beneath the smoothness that suggested it was not used to carrying warmth. "I am Eleanor," she said. "Just Eleanor. I do not use the family name anymore." Something shifted in his expression, too quickly to read. "Then, just Eleanor," he said. "I wonder if you might show me the library wing my money apparently purchased. I have never seen it, and I find I have no appetite for dinner." Marguerite's voice cut across the room like shears. "Lord Renwick, your seat is here. Surely you did not come all this way to tour a library with the help." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Lord Renwick turned his head, not his body, just his head, and looked at Marguerite with an expression that was perfectly polite and entirely without warmth. "I came all this way," he said, "for my own reasons. They do not require your chair." He turned back to Eleanor and offered his arm. She stared at it. She stared at him. 60 people were watching. Marguerite's face had gone the color of cold ash. The headmistress was gripping the back of her chair. Eleanor could feel the weight of every gaze in the room pressing against her skin, and beneath that weight, something stranger. The faint, impossible warmth radiating from him, as though the air between them had its own pulse. She set down the pitcher. She took his arm. The linen of his sleeve was cool beneath her roughened fingers, and she could feel, beneath it, the stillness of a body that did not generate its own heat. She noticed this and filed it away in the place where she kept things she was not yet ready to examine. They walked out of the dining hall together. Behind them, the silence broke into noise that sounded like weather. The library was dark when they entered, and Eleanor reached for the lamp on the nearest table. Before her fingers found the match, the gas sconces along the wall bloomed into light as though an invisible hand had turned each one. She looked at Lord Renwick. He was watching her face, not the sconces. "The mechanisms here are quite modern," he said, offering nothing further. "They are not gas sconces," Eleanor said. "They are oil lamps with no wicks. I clean them every Thursday." Something happened to his mouth. Not a smile, not yet, but the geography of it changed, as though a smile were something he remembered in theory but had not practiced in a very long time. "You are observant," he said. "I am a matron. Observation is most of what they pay me for." She released his arm and walked into the library, letting her hand trail along the spines of the books. The leather was warm under her fingertips, the smell of binding glue and old paper rising around her like a familiar room. "Why are you here, Lord Renwick? Truly." "I was told you would be here," he said. She turned. "By whom?" He did not answer immediately. He stood in the doorway with the lamplight pooling around him. For a moment, he looked less like a man and more like something that had been waiting in this library long before the books arrived. "I have been looking for someone," he said finally, "for a very long time." Over the following weeks, Lord Renwick returned to the school 4 times. He came on Tuesdays and Fridays, always in the evening, always with a reason. An inspection of the foundation, a question about the accounts, a book he wished to donate. Miss Parnell was delighted. The staff were curious. Eleanor, who was assigned to attend him during each visit, was bewildered. The first time he asked her to walk the grounds with him. The October air carried the scent of wet leaves and coal smoke from the distant city, and their breath made clouds. Hers did, at least. She noticed that his did not. He asked her about the school, about the students, about the curriculum. She answered carefully. He listened the way no one had listened to her in 3 years. With his whole body turned toward her, as though her words were the only sound in the world. The second time, they sat in the library. She was mending a tear in one of the older volumes, a careful job with paste and linen strips. And he watched her hands with an expression she could not decipher. He asked about her life before the school. She told him she had come from a family of means and that circumstances had changed. She did not explain further. He did not press. "You handle those books as though they are the most valuable things in the building," he said. "They are," she said. "Everything else can be replaced." He looked at her then with something so close to pain that she set down her paste-brush and said, "What is it?" "You remind me of someone," he said. "Forgive me. It is unsettling." "Who?" "Someone I lost," he said. "A long time ago." The third visit, he brought her a pair of gloves. Not fine gloves, working gloves, lined with lambskin, the kind that would protect her cracked hands from the lye. They were wrapped in brown paper and left on the sideboard where she would find them without an audience. She found them. She turned them over. Inside the left glove, in handwriting that was not modern, letters formed with a quill's pressure, not a steel nib, was a single line. "For hands that deserve gentler work." She wore them the next day. He noticed. He said nothing. But the corner of his mouth moved again, that ghost of a smile, and Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. A door she had locked 3 years ago, rattling in its frame. The fourth visit was different. It rained, and the school was cold, and Eleanor had been unable to light the fire in the library because the flue had jammed. She was kneeling beside the hearth, arms blackened to the elbow with soot, when he arrived. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. A woman of education and breeding, on her knees in a cold room, covered in ash. And for the first time, something in his composure cracked. "This is not right," he said, and his voice was rough enough to scrape. "It is what it is," she said, sitting back on her heels. "The flue needs a sweep, not a lord." He crossed the room, knelt beside her, this man in his fine coat, his polished boots, and placed his hand flat against the stone of the hearth. The stone warmed. She felt it through her skirt, through the floor, through the cold that had settled in her bones. The fire caught without a match. The flames were blue for a moment before turning gold. She looked at his hand on the stone. She looked at his face. "That is not a modern mechanism either," she said quietly. "No," he said. "It is not." She did not move away. She stayed kneeling beside him in the firelight, close enough to feel the strange absence of warmth from his body and the stranger presence of warmth from everything he touched. She thought, "I should be afraid." But the thought had no weight. It was a leaf falling through still air, and the ground it landed on had been prepared for it for some time. It was during this visit that Marguerite struck again. Eleanor returned to her room above the chandler's shop to find a letter from the school's board of governors. Someone, anonymously, though the perfume on the envelope was Marguerite's, had written to inform them that the school's matron was a woman of disgraced family, that she had been disinherited for cause, that her continued employment would reflect poorly on the institution and its donors. The letter recommended her immediate dismissal. Miss Parnell delivered the news the following morning. She was kind about it, which somehow made it worse. "I fought for you, Eleanor," she said, "but the governors are afraid of losing patronage. Lady Claremont has made herself very clear." Eleanor packed her single trunk with steady hands. She did not cry. She had cried once, 3 years ago, when she had signed the papers that gave Marguerite everything, and she had decided then that it would be the last time. Tears were a currency she could no longer afford. She left without telling Lord Renwick. She found lodgings in a boarding house near Spitalfields, a narrow room with a window that faced a wall. She applied for work at a bookbinder's. She ate bread and dripping for supper. She waited for the world to settle around her new shape, the way it always did, the way water finds its level. He found her within 3 days. She opened her door to a knock, and there he was, filling the narrow corridor with his presence, his expression controlled, but his eyes, those deep Winter River eyes, blazing with something that looked like fury and felt, to her, terrifyingly like care. "You left," he said. "I was dismissed." "I know. I also know why. And by whom?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, and the room, which had been damp and cold, warmed around him as though his presence were a hearth. "Your sister engineered this. She wrote to the governors. She has been tracking your movements since the dinner." "Half-sister," Eleanor said, "and she has every right to protect her position." "She has no right to destroy yours." "Lord Renwick." Eleanor stood with her back against the wall, arms crossed, chin lifted. "I appreciate your concern, but I made my choices, and Marguerite made hers, and the distance between them is my affair." "What choices?" His voice was too sharp. He was standing too close. In the small room, with the lamplight flickering, she could see details she had missed in the school's larger spaces, the way no shadow fell from him against the wall, the way the lamp flame leaned toward him as though drawn by gravity. "What did you sacrifice, Eleanor? Because I have watched you for weeks now, and what I see is a woman living with the consequences of something she will not name." She said nothing. Her mouth became a seam. He saw it, and his expression changed. "I learned the truth from a clerk at the solicitor's office your family used," he said more quietly. "I know about the forged will. I know you discovered it. I know you traded your silence, your inheritance, your name, your entire life, so that the estate's dependents would not suffer from the scandal." The silence in the room was dense enough to touch. "You had no right to look into that," she said, and her voice was steady, though her hands were not. "Perhaps not, but I have already acted on it." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "I retained a solicitor of my own. The original will, your father's true will, has been located in the county archives. The forgery can be proved. I have initiated proceedings to restore your inheritance." Eleanor stared at the document. Then she stared at him. Then the thing she felt was not gratitude. It was not relief. It was a fury so clean and bright, it took even her by surprise. You did what? I corrected an injustice. You upended a decision I made with full knowledge of its cost. She stepped forward, and though he was a head taller and built like something that had outlasted centuries, he stepped back. I chose that silence, Lord Renwick. I chose it because the alternative was a court battle that would have destroyed the livelihoods of 30 people who depended on that estate. The servants, the tenants. I counted the cost, and I paid it, and it was mine to pay. It was too much. That is not your judgment to make. Her voice shook now, not with weakness, but with the effort of containing something enormous. You say you have been looking for someone. You say I remind you of someone you lost. But I am not her. I am not a wrong to be righted or a memory to be recovered. I am a woman who made a choice, and you do not get to unmake it because it makes you uncomfortable. He stood very still. The lamp flame between them guttered and then burned steady. Outside, a cart rattled past on the cobblestones, and the sound was ordinary enough to make the extraordinariness of this moment almost painful. You are right, he said. His voice had lost its authority. What remained was raw. I have made a terrible mistake. Yes. I saw what had been done to you and I could not bear it. Not again. He looked at his own hands as though they had acted without his permission. 3 centuries ago, I watched someone I loved destroyed by a sacrifice she chose to make, and I did nothing because I told myself it was her right. She died. I have carried that inaction like a stone in my chest ever since. When I found you, when I saw you on your knees in that cold room, in a life you did not deserve. He stopped. I swore I would not stand by again, and in doing so, I did the very thing I despised. I took your choice from you. The word centuries landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Eleanor looked at him, at his scarred temple, his impossibly still eyes, the way no breath moved in his chest, and said, How old are you? Old enough to know better, he said, and apparently too old to have learned. You are a vampire, she said. Not a question. Not with horror. With the plain directness of a woman who had been cleaning wickless lamps and watching fireless hearths and noting shadowless walls for weeks. Yes. And the woman I remind you of? Her name was Eleanor. She lived in the 14th century. She had your face, your hands, your habit of counting things when she was frightened. His voice broke on the last word, and the sound of it, the cracking of something that had held for centuries, filled the small room. But you are not her. You have told me so, and you are right. And I am sorry. Eleanor stood in her cold room in Spitalfields, in her turned dress, with her roughened hands, and looked at an immortal being who was shaking. I don't curtsy to men who hide behind centuries, she said. Something happened to his face. The geography of his mouth changed, and this time it completed the journey it had been attempting since that first night in the library. He smiled. It was not a grand expression. It was small and slightly crooked, and it transformed his face from something carved into something human. Eleanor understood with absolute clarity that she was the first person to see it in a very, very long time. No, he said, I imagine you do not. She reached out and took the legal document from his hand. She did not tear it. She folded it and set it on the table. You will write to your solicitor, she said. You will halt the proceedings, and then you and I will sit down, and I will tell you what I want to do about my inheritance, and you will listen. And if I decide that the sacrifice stands, you will respect it. And if I decide that the time has come to fight for what is mine, you will help me, on my terms. Yes, he said, and you will stop looking at me as though I am a woman who died 500 years ago. The smile faded, but something warmer remained. I will try, he said. Though I should tell you, the longer I know you, the less I see her. You are considerably more terrifying. The corner of her mouth moved. It was the first time he had seen her smile. It cost him something to witness it, something old and heavy that he had been carrying without knowing he could set it down. But the legal proceedings, once set in motion, could not be quietly withdrawn. Marguerite received notice from Renwick's solicitor within the week, and her response was not fear. It was escalation. She had built her entire life on the foundation of that forged will. Her marriage, her social position, her husband's investments, and she would not let it crumble without a fight. She came to the boarding house. Eleanor opened the door and found her half-sister standing in the corridor in dove-gray wool, her face composed, her gloves perfect, a leather folio pressed against her chest. "I have written to every family in the county," Marguerite said without greeting. "They know about your lord. The solicitor's clerk was very helpful, once I paid him enough. Lord Renwick has no verifiable history before 1790. No birth records, no family seat, no parish register. He appeared in London 40 years ago with wealth that has no traceable origin and a face that has not aged since." She paused, letting the weight of this settle. "If you proceed with this challenge to the will, I will make his irregularities public. Every newspaper, every parlor, every club, they will investigate, and whatever he is hiding, and we both know he is hiding something, will be dragged into the light." Eleanor felt the cold travel through her body, the way cold travels through stone. Slowly, completely, not for herself, for him, for the man who had survived centuries by remaining unseen, and who had made himself visible because of her. "Leave," Eleanor said. "Think about it," Marguerite said, and turned on her perfect heel and left. Eleanor sat on her narrow bed and thought about it. She thought about a man who had watched the world change around him like weather, who had kept himself apart because exposure meant destruction, who had broken his own rules of safety because he could not bear to watch her suffer. She thought about the sacrifice she had made 3 years ago and the new shape it might take if she were brave enough, or foolish enough, to let it change. She went to him. He kept rooms above a bookshop in Bloomsbury, a choice that made her smile when she learned it, because of course he did. The rooms were lined with books and warmed by fires that burned without fuel. The air smelled of old paper and cedarwood, and the particular stillness that gathered around him like atmosphere. She told him what Marguerite had threatened. She watched his face as he absorbed it. The flicker of something ancient and dangerous behind his eyes, quickly controlled. She watched him master it. "She cannot be allowed to expose you," Eleanor said, "and I will not let my fight become your destruction." "Then what do you propose?" "I propose," Eleanor said, "that we do not fight the forgery in court. I propose that I go to Marguerite and offer her a different bargain. Not silence this time. Transformation. She keeps the estate. I keep the right to my name and a settlement sufficient to establish myself independently. She keeps her secret, and yours stays safe. And in exchange?" She paused, feeling the shape of this idea, testing its weight. "In exchange, she endows the school, permanently. Enough to ensure that no matron is ever dismissed because a wealthy patron threatened to withdraw funds." He looked at her for a long time. "You would give up your inheritance again." "I would reshape it. The first time I gave it away out of fear. This time I am choosing what it becomes." She met his eyes. "That is not the same thing." The negotiation took 3 weeks. Eleanor conducted it herself at a table in a solicitor's office on Gray's Inn Road, with Marguerite across from her and their respective legal counsel flanking them like seconds in a duel that used paper instead of steel. Lord Renwick waited in the corridor. He had offered to be present. Eleanor had said no. "This is my inheritance," she had told him, "which means it is my negotiation." He had looked at her with an expression that was no longer the expression of a man seeing a ghost. It was the expression of a man seeing, clearly and for the first time, the woman in front of him. "Yes," he said. "It is." Marguerite fought. She was sharp and strategic, and she had spent 3 years refining her position. But Eleanor had spent 3 years on her knees, scrubbing floors and mending books and learning the precise dimensions of her own endurance. She knew something Marguerite did not. The person who has already lost everything negotiates without fear. The settlement was signed on a Thursday. Eleanor emerged from the solicitor's office into grey London light with a document that gave her the right to her own name, a sum sufficient to lease a small property. The knowledge that the Briarwood School would receive an endowment large enough to ensure its independence for a generation. Marguerite kept the estate. The forged will would never be challenged. The secret, all the secrets, would remain buried. Eleanor stood on the pavement and breathed. The air tasted of rain and coal smoke and freedom. It was the first breath she had taken in 3 years that did not carry the weight of everything she had given up. Lord Renwick was waiting by the iron railings. He did not ask how it had gone. He looked at her face, and he knew. That evening, Marguerite made her last attempt. She appeared at the school's winter gathering, the one funded now by her own forced generosity, and stood in the center of the room and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "My sister has always been skilled at finding protectors. I wonder what this one costs her." The room went quiet. Eleanor stood near the punch table, her new dress, modest, well-made, purchased with her own settlement, suddenly feeling like armor that had failed. She could feel the old machinery of humiliation beginning to turn, the gears she knew so well, the grinding reduction of herself to something small and shameful. And then she did what she had never done before. She walked to the center of the room. "My name is Eleanor Ashwick," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. She had scrubbed floors and mended books and negotiated her own inheritance back from the woman who stole it, and she was done being small. 3 years ago, I made a sacrifice to protect the people who depended on my family's estate. I gave up my name, my position, and my home. I did it willingly, and I would do it again. But I will not give up my dignity, not anymore. Not for you, Marguerite. She turned to the room. This school's endowment was secured by my negotiation. Miss Parnell can confirm it. The terms are public record. Whatever you think of me, whatever my sister tells you, that is what I chose to do with what remained of my inheritance. That is who I am. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one at the patronage dinner months ago. That silence had been predatory. This one was something closer to respect. Lord Renwick stepped forward then, not to rescue her, she had already rescued herself, but to stand beside her. The room noticed. The room would always notice him. But what they saw was not a lord claiming a woman. What they saw was a man choosing to stand where she had already made her stand, adding his weight to her own, not in front of her, but next to her. "Miss Ashwick speaks for herself," he said, his voice carrying that quiet authority that never needed volume. "She always has. It is one of the reasons I intend to remain precisely where I am." Marguerite looked at them, at Eleanor's straight spine and Renwick's immovable presence, and the room that had shifted imperceptibly but completely away from her. And for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. She left without another word. The door closed behind her with a sound that was quieter than Eleanor expected, and somehow final. Spring came to London like a guest who arrives early and pretends to have been invited. The crocuses appeared in the park near Bloomsbury 3 weeks before anyone expected them. The bookseller beneath Lord Renwick's rooms complained, pleasantly, that the climbing rose on the east wall had begun blooming in February, which was medically impossible and horticulturally indecent. Eleanor moved into the rooms above the bookshop on a Tuesday in March. She brought her single trunk, her mended books, her working gloves lined with lambskin, a small wooden box containing the settlement papers, and the first draft of a proposal to establish a lending library for working women in Spitalfields. She placed the box on the desk in the study, her study, he had insisted, the one with the best light, and stood in the doorway and looked at the room that was hers. Renwick appeared behind her. She felt him before she heard him, the way she always did. That slight drop in temperature, the faint scent of cedarwood and old stone, the sense of something vast and patient drawing near. You have rearranged the books, she said, noticing. I have made room for yours. She turned. He was leaning against the doorframe with an expression she had learned to read over the past months. The expression that meant he was trying very hard not to say something tender, and failing. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, and there was ink on his left hand. He looked, in this moment, less like a centuries-old immortal and more like a man who had spent the morning rearranging bookshelves because the woman he loved was coming home. I have a question, she said. You always have a question. How long did it take you to stop seeing her when you look at me? He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. The night you told me you did not curtsy to men who hide behind centuries, he said. She would never have said that. She was gentler than you. Gentler? You are kinder, he said. But you are not gentle. You are the most ferociously kind person I have ever known, and I have known a great many people. He paused. Also, she could not make tea. You make excellent tea. This is not an insignificant distinction when one has spent several centuries drinking terrible tea out of politeness. Eleanor laughed. It came out of her like something that had been stored in a room she had forgotten she owned, bright and slightly startled and entirely real. He watched her laugh the way other men watch sunrises, as though it were proof that the world still worked. She made tea. He sat at the kitchen table and watched her do it, his chin resting on his hand. His gray-green eyes following her movements with an attention that would have been unsettling from anyone else but from him, felt like warmth. The kettle sang. The cups were mismatched. One from his collection, one from her boarding house, chipped at the rim but still good. She poured. He wrapped his hands around the cup and held it, not to drink, but to feel the warmth, because warmth was something his body could receive, but not generate. She understood this now, as simply one of the facts of loving him. I filed the proposal for the lending library this morning, she said, settling into the chair across from him. The lease on the Spitalfields property is reasonable, and I have enough from the settlement for the first year's operations. After that, we shall need donors. I know a reclusive lord with money and no social obligations, he said. You have social obligations. I have written them on the calendar. You have written everything on the calendar. There is no room left for March. March is a busy month. She blew on her tea. Also, the climbing rose needs pruning. The bookseller is complaining again. The rose is fine. It bloomed through a wall, Renwick. Through brick. He looked at her over the rim of his untouched cup, and the smile was there again. That small, crooked, hard-won thing that she had called into existence in a cold room in Spitalfields, and that appeared now with increasing frequency, as though the muscles of his face were remembering something his mind had forgotten centuries ago. Things bloom near you, he said. I cannot control it. I have tried. You have not tried. I have not tried very hard, he admitted. She reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was cool, always cool, but his fingers closed around hers with a pressure that was careful and certain and absolute. The grip of someone who understood, at last, that the woman holding his hand was not a ghost, not a memory, not a second chance at an old grief, but a person. Specific, stubborn, ferociously kind, and entirely her own. Outside, the impossible rose pushed another bud through the brickwork, and the bookseller sighed. London went on being London, and the tea grew cold because neither of them let go long enough to drink it.